Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker, this time covering Norsca. So I've made a few changes to how we're going to be dealing with this one, because Norsca really does need a fair bit of attention for those of you who actually want to play Norsca, especially if you want to play it on the higher difficulties. Now, as always, this list here is based around Legendary difficulty campaign, very hard battles, no mods, no multiplayer on Ultra Unit scale. If you're not playing on those settings, you're going to have a very different experience, especially if you're playing on different campaign settings. Now, I want to just talk briefly about that, because Norsca is affected by the campaign difficulty more than any other race in the game, because it all comes down to supply lines. Norsca, in regard to their supply lines, they affect them so much because Norsca is a low economy faction. They don't make much money through taxes. But what Norsca is able to do is reduce their upkeep cost globally through various things, through technologies and through defeating the Warriors of Chaos. You can defeat your, you can reduce your global upkeep cost on all of your troops quite significantly. Now, where that comes into effect on the campaign is that if you're playing on easy and normal difficulty, your supply lines are 1 and 2% respectively. So as Norsca, you can potentially reduce your upkeep cost by 150%, right? Giving you on, get rid of 100% to begin with, and then 50% extra wiggle room, right? So that means if you're playing on normal difficulty, that allows you to recruit 26 armies and still be in that completely free threshold. But if you're playing on hard difficulty, you're looking at like 7 or 8. And if you're playing on very hard or legendary, you're looking at 4 to 5 armies that'll be completely free. Now, it's not that you have to have all of your armies free as Norsca. Even if you're playing on like lower difficulties, once you start paying 2, 4, 6% for your armies, you're barely even going to notice it. It's when you start to pay like 50% for your troops, and you've got like 50 armies, you're going to start to pay for, really start to pay for it. Now, with legendary difficulty, as an example, also on legendary, you pay an additional 10% at the start. So base upkeep is 110%, and then 15% for extra armies. What ends up happening is that you make about 10 to 12 grand by owning all of Norsca, but that's the only real territory that you can own in the entire campaign. There's bits and pieces all over the place, and outposts make a little bit, but for the most part, you're looking at about 12,000 in golden in revenue. Now, of course, you make a lot of money through looting, but that loot money does not scale with supply lines. And even if you're fighting high tier armies, it's quite possible, and this happens to a lot of people, that the upkeep costs are so high that even if you're fighting battles constantly, you end up not being able to pay your troops. Now, economy is very important, because if you don't pay your troops, then you end up taking attrition and can't replenish them. And Norsca takes a long time to recruit new troops, so it's very important that you pay your troops. You used to be able to bypass it by going into raid stance and just go into negative economy, but you can't do that anymore. Anyway, let's talk about this. Now, I haven't just done it from Doomstack to Trash and then ABC this time. All units will be situational, right? So never recruit simply means that you just never should get these units. Only recruit in the early game means it basically would be under the same category, but these are units that you can get and can work for you until you get to higher tier. So this one here means that even once you've got access to your full roster, you can make these units work, but you're going to have to work very hard for it. And then this means that, even after your Doomstack units have been unlocked, this units, they're not Doomstacks, but, they can make it work. Rather than just doing ABC, I feel like this will be a bit more accurate for Norsca, because so many disaster battles sent in from Norsca, despite the fact it's probably one of the least played factions. And a lot of the time I can't help you, because like the people send in Marauder stacks full of Marauder champions. I'm just like, I can't do anything, because like Hellstorm rocket batteries, I tell you 1,000 times not to do it, and then you do it, and I can't help you. Anyway, let's talk about the units. We'll start with melee infantry, then missile infantry, then cavalry, and then half of their roster is monsters, and we'll talk about them. Alright, so let's start with Marauders. There's 3 different variants. Let me just move them up here, and we'll talk about them each. The 3 basic Marauder units. So we've got basic Marauders, Marauders with spears, and Marauders with great weapons. So I'd put them in this order. These ones here you can put in only recruit in the early game. And this one here I would never recruit. If we go and have a look at where they are in their roster, the reason why these are only recruited in the early game is because by filling your army with these, it means you don't necessarily need to have a barracks. So it fills up, you don't fill up an unnecessary slot because you as Norsca have extremely limited build slots on top of crappy economy and crappy campaign mechanics. Every other order race out there has got 8 build slots in their major settlements, and major capitals have 10. But no, Norsca's got 6. Norsca is still a Warhammer 1 race, right? Because that's how it used to be in Warhammer 1. Don't know if they'll get an update in Warhammer 3, we'll just have to wait and see. So yeah, being able to recruit these without filling up a build slot can be very useful. Because if you're here at tier 1, right, you get the port. You can't even build anything else, so you don't really get that much options with it, which can be a real pain. So, that's why these two here, they get the only recruit in the early game, and this one here being a tier 2 unit requiring the barracks, by the time you get to tier 2, you've simply got a better choice. And if we have a look at the tier 2 there, you've got Marauder Berserkers. Now, Marauder Berserkers, if you have a look at them, they have anti-infantry, which is way more useful and friendly, way more useful, and they're immune to psychology, just way more useful than armor piercing, because in the early stages of the campaign, when you're going up against other Norscan units, you're not really going up against armored units, so bringing a lot of stuff that the enemy's not bringing, you know, what for? So this unit just doesn't really have a place, but by the time you're dealing with armored units, you have way better choices than this piece of shit unit. So that's why it just doesn't fit in the roster. It needs to be either tier 1 or tier 0, otherwise just never bother with it. For the extra upkeep cost and the reduced melee defense, not worth it. Alright, so the Marauder Berserker, this one here, I would actually put it under A tier. Not A tier. Like, you can make these ones work. Even in the late campaign, you've got to work hard for it, but you can make this work. I wouldn't put it here, but you can make these work. Next up, we've got the champion units. So we've got the champion with great weapons, and then where's the other one? The regular champion there. So looking at the champion units, they're tier 3. The Marauder champion with great weapons does require the Ruinous Kiln, which is not a terrible building to build. It sucks that you need 2 building slots to build some of the units, but you're definitely going to want to build this for the late campaign. We'll cover that a bit later on, but yeah, you're going to want it. So it's not. I'm not going to penalize it too much with that. Marauder champions, decent amount of armor, decent melee stats. They don't have bonus versus infantry. This one here's got the armor piercing. Like I said, this one here is a better option for armor piercing at that tier, because this is when you're going to start to be finding armored units. But one of the good things about Norscan melee infantry is they do have kind of a special ability here under Rage, where the longer they're in combat, and they do have to stay there for a little while, they have to be there for, you know, a couple of minutes, they can start to get extra leadership, which is useful because that'll start to negate the difficulty penalty, because you have -4 if you're playing a very high battle difficulty. Then you get physical resistance, you know, which isn't too bad, and then extra melee attack finally, which not too bad. It kind of makes them a cut above the Warriors of Chaos units, as long as they stay in combat the entire time. If you go out of combat, then that you have to start again with it. They're still going to be relatively squishy, even the champion units. So I'm going to put the champions under, you can make these work, and same thing with this one here. You can make them work. It's difficult. I wouldn't prioritize it, but you can do it. So that's the melee infantry. Let's move on to the missile infantry, which is only 2. So we've got the Marauder Hunters with javelins, and then just the Marauder Hunters. You know, very creative names here. So we've got the anti-large variant with 90 range, and the armor-piercing shield breaker variant with 80 range. This one here does more damage, but I think the thing that cripples it is also the firing arc. The javelin ones, they can arc their shots a lot better than the Marauder Hunters. So one thing that you might find problematic with them is if you put these guys behind your line, trying to shoot over the heads of your own troops, they'll be constantly obstructed. So it can be a problem dealing with shielded units, because they've got such limited range, they're just not really going to get a lot of those shots off. Whereas these ones here, for what they're designed to do, and the fact that they're cheaper, I feel like these ones here have a place in your army. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to put the Marauder Hunters with javelins at you can make these work even in the late campaign. This one here is there to deal with cavalry, to deal with monsters, that kind of stuff. It's suitable in your army if you need a cheap option. But this one here, I just don't really see any use for it whatsoever. It's just not a good unit. Even in the early game, I think you can do better than this. So it's under never recruit it. Just skip it entirely. It's a piece of crap. If it's in your garrison, you just have to make do with it. Basically, with this unit here, you want to be shooting into something's flank, and that's just going to be difficult if you're outnumbered, which will happen a lot. Alright, now let's move on to cavalry units. So, Norsca borrows a lot of the cavalry units from the Warriors of Chaos. In fact, a lot of their units borrow from the Warriors of Chaos. They've got these 3 Marauder cavalry, similar to the Warriors of Chaos, which we did yesterday. Right, so if we have a look at them, they require a cavalry building, which again, limited build slots make them difficult to justify. You've got the Marauder Horsemen, which we covered yesterday, Marauder Horsemen throwing axes, and then the Marauder Horsemasters. So I don't really want to double down on the stuff that we said yesterday. The big difference between these ones and the Warriors of Chaos ones is these ones here do actually have rage, but another thing to point in is that these guys here should not be put into melee, so I would not really value that too highly, because they will not last very long in melee. You should only put them in melee once they've exhausted their ammunition. So, I would put these 2 here in only recruit them in the early game, and this one here, you can make them work. If you like really want to have cavalry in your army, this is a decent unit for harassment, but you know, it's not going to go toe to toe with heavy cavalry. Best thing you can do is hope to thin them out a little bit with a cheaper option. Entirely up to you. Then we've got chariots. So we've got the Norscan Ice Wolf chariots and then the Norscan Marauder chariots. If we have a look at them, they're also in the cavalry building, and they both require the ruinous kiln sort of building chain. Now, as I've said before, I do like to build this at least in one province, so I'm not going to penalize it too much because their Doomstack unit does require it. Alright, so the Marauder chariots being tier 2, anti-infantry, which is good. You're definitely going to be going up a lot of infantry in the early game, so bonus versus infantry plus 18. This is a good cavalry unit. Same thing with the Marauder Ice Wolf chariots. They both serve the same purpose, except I would say the Marauder Ice Wolf chariots are definitely better because you've got way more speed with them. 95 speed compared to 78 speed. That speed there allows them to outrun Bretonnian knights. And playing as Norsca, you're gonna deal with Bretonnian knights because you don't want your chariots being caught by them. So I'm going to put this one here as only recruit in the early game, and this one here as you can make this unit work. If you micro them hard, you could do a good job with them. But you got to, like I said, you got to work hard with them. Alright, now that's actually all their cavalry sorted. So now we move on to their monsters. Starting with the most basic stuff, we've got the wolves. So they've got 2 variants, and they're kind of different from each other. You've got the Norscan Warhounds, and then also the Norscan Ice Wolves. Now, the big difference between them is that Norscan Warhounds have 80 entities, 95 speed, and they're small units, and the Norscan Ice Wolves are considered large. You can tell the difference because of entity and unit size. You see how there's a difference on the unit card here? A lot of people don't know that. In fact, I didn't know that until I was like 8,000 hours into the game. And you've also got a fairly small entity size. There's almost half of them there. Now, in terms of the combat stats, at the same speed, 26 melee attack and 19 melee defense is pretty damn low for a unit that only has 48 entities. If you have a look at this one here, they've actually got the same melee attack. Am I not mistaken there? Yeah, 26, and that's the primary thing you want them for. 17 melee defense. Of course, they've got a lot lower charge bonus. I guess that's what you really want. These ones here do have a much higher weapon strength, though. But for a tier 1 unit, and for that cost, I really do think those ones perform better for their tier. So the way I'm going to do this one, I'm going to put this one as only recruit them in the early game. If you want cavalry, I'd highly recommend go for them in the later campaign. And as for the Norscan Ice Wolves, due to their limitations and being recruited at tier 3, I'd actually put them under never recruit. I just don't think they're good. I did a campaign where I didn't recruit any mammoths in a campaign, and I basically used the entirety of the roster. We had armies of everything. And this unit didn't perform well, but this one here was okay. Okay. Let's move on now to trolls. So we got 2 variants here. We got the regular trolls and then the Norscan Ice Trolls. So both of these units are recruited under the glacial passage chain here, which you want to be building in a major settlement. I'm not going to talk too much about Throg's and the fact that he can boost them by a ton, because I think Throg is a piece of shit. Even when playing as Throg, which I never do, I would replace him for other lords. So, like, even in this particular campaign here, I don't have Throg active, and I think this campaign here went fairly well. So, oh yeah, we were talking about the trolls here. So they're both recruitable at tier 3, but the Norscan trolls don't require a secondary building, whereas the Norscan ice trolls do require the offering of slaughter. This is not necessarily a building that I would completely prioritize, but sometimes you want to get it because it does increase your recruit slots and reduce recruitment costs, so it can be useful. Alright, but both of them being tier 3, both of them having 16 entities, same amount of hit points. The Norscan Ice Trolls are more expensive, but you don't really have to worry too much about that. The upkeep cost, if you keep your supply lines down. 100 weapon strength, armor piercing, 120 weapon strength, armor piercing. I would say that, let me have a look, leadership is the same as well. Yep. Speed's the same. Yep, but the Norscan Ice Trolls, I've used an army of both Trolls and Norscan Ice Trolls. Now, I know that Norscan Ice Trolls, I think they take 2 turns to recruit, whereas Norscan Trolls only take 1 turn to recruit. That's a big advantage, right, over them. So the way I would put this is the regular Trolls, I'd actually put that as never recruit them because they're shit. But the Norscan Ice Trolls are okay. You can make them work. I wouldn't put them under a... Hang on, let me think about this. I'm just remembering back into that campaign. Maybe I should have loaded up that save file in this one. I don't even know if I still got it. In my non-mammoth armies, the Norscan Ice Trolls kind of did the best, even when they weren't commanded by Throg. So I think I might actually go, these are good. The big thing to watch out for, though, is their leadership. Ugh, I'm really hesitant to put them under these are good, to be honest. Really hesitant to. I think I'll put it under you can make these work, because I'm pretty sure I still got smashed with them quite often, and there's other units that I want to put under there, and I feel like for the tier they're pretty much on par with these ones here. You can make them work. If you're playing with Throg, then you can make them much better, but otherwise I'd stick them under you can make these work. Alright, next up let's talk about Fimir. Okay, so there's 2 variants with Fimir. Let's talk about them. So that's in the same building chain as the Trolls, but they go up in tier. So Fimir Warriors are tier 4, so we're no longer in the early game at this point here. They have magic attack, sundered armor, and armor piercing. They've also got this over here from the Mist, which if they've got high leadership, they get extra missile resistance, which is, it's better than nothing. They're probably very vulnerable to missiles. But one thing that I really didn't like about them, because I definitely used them, was their low speed. They're 45 speed compared to the Trolls 54 speed. That's a big difference because you really want to be closing in. One of the battles that I was fighting against the Empire, for example, I really struggled with Fimir warriors because I couldn't catch the enemy archers. They just wouldn't get them into combat fast enough. Whereas a very similar army that I was going up against using Norscan Ice Trolls absolutely rolled over them. And then you've got the tier 5 variant up here, Fimir warriors with great weapons. These one here also have bonus versus large. That's basically the only difference that these ones here have. I think it's the same, a little bit higher weapon strength as well. So, here's what I have to say about Fimir warriors. Never recruit them. They are shit. Absolute shit. For tier 4 and tier 5, they're absolute shit. But what about sundered armor? Fine. Whatever. You've got other things that have sundered armor, and the thing is, in your late campaign, you have so much armor piercing, you don't need to sunder armor if you just bypass it entirely. You don't necessarily need magic attack either. Most units don't have that much resistance to physical attacks. So I just find that Fimir warriors, and I use them a fair bit, so I'm not saying like I've never used them. I definitely have. They really performed very badly in the campaign that I played with them. So if you want to put them in like mixed armies, maybe you can make it work. But I think that they might work best with the Marauder champions. But for tier 4 and tier 5, you have got so much better options. For their price point and their speed and what they can do, and the fact that AI target them, I just don't recommend getting these units at all. They are awful. Okay, next up is the Manticore, straight away into Never Recruit, and that is because it has Rampage. You should never prioritize units you can't control very well, and because Manticores, they take a little bit of damage and then they Rampage and then they end up getting killed. Unworkable in my opinion, unless you're good enough to be able to get these guys into combat without ever taking any damage. But again, you've got better options, especially considering I think that's a tier 4 unit. Yeah, tier 4. It does not belong at tier 4. That is a tier 2 unit at best. But Rampage is... I hate Rampage, and you shouldn't prioritize building it. You get extremely frustrated with these units. Their combat stats are totally fine, but Rampage, unacceptable. So that's why I'm putting it under never recruit that unit. You've got better options. Okay, next up, let's talk about Skin Wolves. So there's two variants here. We've got regular Skin Wolves and Armored Skin Wolves. Alright, let's have a look at them. So they're recruited from this monster building here, which is where the Norscan Warhounds come from. Now, I do like to prioritize building this as much as I can, because I do like to have extra capacity for Skin Wolf Werekins, because Skin Wolf Werekins are very good heroes, but we're not talking about that too much. Now, regular Skin Wolves are tier 3, whereas the armored variant is tier 4. They've both got physical resistance, 20%. And 20%. This one here has 70 armor, which is a bit compared to 15. They both got the same amount of hit points, I think. Yep. These ones here are a little bit more expensive. 24 entities, all of them large. Both of them would have... I think they've all got the exact same combat stats. Let me just check that. Melee attack 30 and 28 melee defense. Yep, 30 and 28 melee defense. So what you're paying for with this is just... What is that? Was that 55 armor? That's the only thing you're getting extra, I think. No, you're also losing 10 speed. Yeah, and I wouldn't sacrifice the speed for armor. Not with the enemies that you have to go up against. No way in hell. So, okay. I would go, and I use this unit fairly extensively. I would put the Skin Wolf Armored unit under Never Recruit. Unacceptable. I would never pay more for a slower unit that has the exact same amount of damage dealing and is actually slower, and it all has a 75 extra armor. A lot of the time you're going to be going up against guns. That armor is not going to be worth shit. So that's useless. As for regular Skin Wolves, I didn't find them to be overly good. I'd actually put them as only recruit them in the early game. I definitely wouldn't get them in the late campaign. But Skin Wolf Werekins, the heroes, they're really good if you know how to use them right. They're very good hero. Alright, now let's move on to Giants, straight away in the trash. Okay, let's have a look at what's wrong with Giants, apart from everything. So, Giants, where are they recruited from now? They're recruited... where are Giants? Oh, there they are, tier 5 unit. Now, you're definitely going to build this building, but Giant at tier 5, 39 speed, suffers from the same problem as the Warriors of Chaos, right? Too slow, too vulnerable to your enemies. The fact that your enemies are going to have lots of missile units and will be highly skirmish factions, they're too easy for the AI to take down. Even when you have mixed units in your army and you're trying to pin down the missile units, they're going to prioritize taking the Giants, and they're like a magnet for arrows. So they're just such an awful unit. They're like good at 1v1ing Lords, but that's not really something that you should be prioritizing. The enemy missile units are usually the most dangerous units and ones that you should be taking out. Most of the time, the Empire and Bretonnian single entities are not that much of a threat, because while they might be super tanky, they don't necessarily dish out that much damage, whereas missile units will kill you very quickly. So you want to be prioritizing killing them quickly. So yeah, I'm going to put that under Never Recruit. Wow, we've only got 4 units left, and the top 2 slots haven't been filled yet. Norsca's looking good. Alright, next up, we're going to talk about Frostworms. Okay. Frostworms are a tier 5 unit that also require the Offering of War, so you need 2 buildings to get it. But I feel like this is actually a unit that does perform at a tier 5 level. You got decent speed, it slows down enemies' magic attack, armor piercing, and you've got the Frost Breath there, which doesn't do a ton of damage. It's kind of like a pretty weak breath attack, but at least it has something. I would say that this one here, if you're going to not Doomstack, these are good. You can make these work, because they're essentially dragons. But the biggest problem, as the entire roster suffers from, is you've got to watch out for missile units. They're a big target. 90 speed is good, but for a big target, it's not fast enough to dodge a bullet. And they're very vulnerable to missiles. Even though they've got missile resistance, you got to be very careful with them. Okay, now to talk about the best units in their roster, Mammoths. So, Mammoths are recruited from the Chaos Totem and Altar of Bloodfathers. So you do build this building that gets the Norscan Giant, right? It's just that Norscan Giants are awful. So awful. Anyway. Feral Mammoths, we'll talk about them first. So that's a tier 4 unit. Now, War Mammoths are also a tier 4 unit, but they require the tier 3 Ruinous Kiln. This is what I was talking about before, is why I usually like to build this building, because the War Mammoth is where it's at. This building over here, the War Shrine, also requires the tier 4 variant. Now, I usually build this one here in a minor settlement, as we've done here. Just because you don't have enough build slots to build all of your stuff in major settlements. Basically, in major settlements, you get the main building chain that you can't change, the port that you can't change. There's some inland major settlements, like the Sarl encampment over here. That is a major settlement inside of Norsca, without a port. But then you've got these 2 economic buildings, which you definitely should build. Income generated, also income from sacking. You're going to want to sack as much as possible. And also the extra upkeep cost reduction. You're definitely going to want to get that. That leaves you two other buildings, right? Unless you want to, put some of these other ones here in minor ones. So the this one here, I don't prioritize it too much because I don't really care that much for War Shrine War Mammoths. If we have a look at the difference between the War Mammoths and the War Shrine ones, I think they've got the exact same health. Speed 56 as opposed to speed 56. They do have some abilities here. Favor of the Ruinous Power. Extra 10 leadership. That's great, but I don't think that War Mammoths really suffer from leadership problems a lot of the time, so I don't really feel like I need it. Plus, it's only in a small area of effect. And then you've got this one here, Giver of Glory, which imbues 24 melee damage and fire damage and extra leadership. That can be useful. So having a couple of them in the army can be useful, but it's just this one here is a bit of a pain in the ass to get to. Like I said, limited build slots are the big problem. Feral Mammoths, their biggest problem is, of course, Rampage. They're like half the size of a War Mammoth. War Mammoths are absolutely killing machines. So, where would I place them? These are good. You can make these work, definitely. Biggest problem is Rampage. Now, funny thing is where this one here, you'd be like, but that one has Rampage and that one has Rampage. Why is that one good and this one not good? Well, because the thing is, if this one here goes Rampage, at least it's going to kill shit. This one goes Rampage and you can't... This is a unit that you need to micro. This is a unit that you need to throw into the enemy and cause pandemonium. So this one rampaging is not that big of a deal. Whereas that one, it absolutely is a big deal because you probably want to use that one to soak up, like, dodge missiles and harass them. This one here is not doing that. That one there's to throw them into infantry and destroy stuff. Alright, now for the Mammoths. War Mammoths, of course, are the Norscan Doomstack. These are arguably one of the best units in the game. Even though they are an anti-infantry unit, like, this is arguably the best anti-infantry unit in the game, because its splash attack is so damn large, you can delete units of dwarfs so quickly, just roll right over them. They're also really good against cavalry units, because they just do so much splash damage. If you keep them in a tightly packed group of single entities of monsters, these can perform amazingly well. They're reasonably fast, so you can catch missile units pretty well. So at 56 speed, you get a little bit faster than trolls. They're not going to be able to outrun cavalry, so you're not going to be able to outrun pistoliers and outriders. But if you kill off the rest of their army, these ones here also have like ridiculous amounts of health. There's nothing you can do to regenerate them. But, in the course of a battle, but they've got so much health that they can potentially soak up an entire volley's worth, entire salve, all of the ammo of an outrider, and probably die, but still they'll soak it up. Hopefully you don't get sent an entire outrider doomstack sent out there. At which point, if they do that, you just steamroll them. You give them no chance to retreat. Just push them to the edge of the map with a long line. Okay. So, the Chaos Mammoth War Shrine, I wouldn't spam it because it is more expensive. Its combat stats are exactly the same. While they do have a special ability, it's very micro-intensive to sit there and just constantly, ability smashing. You shouldn't be doing that. What you want to be doing with Mammoths is not worrying about buffing them with, special abilities. What you need to be doing with Mammoths is constantly pressing attack orders. Always be attacking. So rather than be like, oh, 10% extra melee damage, extra melee attack, all this kind of shit. Forget about that. You want to be charging. So you attack through one unit of infantry, then just keep pushing through and attack through the next thing. Always be charging, because their charge bonus is huge at where is it, 68, and you'll just smash through everything. You want to be using these through momentum, so you don't want to be sitting there being like click 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 with these sort of things. That could be actually really bad for your overall strategy. I mean, if you're fast enough to be able to do all of that, that's great, but most people aren't. So where I'm going to put this one here is, these are good. I mean, they're just as strong as them. It's just less convenient, and their combat stats are exactly the same. And I just wouldn't really use their abilities that much, just because there's other things that you should be doing. And there we have the Norscan roster. Obviously, they've got a very bad roster with a lot of stuff that just doesn't really work well for them. Their economy is awful. On legendary difficulty, this faction is I do not recommend playing right now. But if you're playing on easy, normal, or even hard difficulty, you can definitely play through a campaign without being forced to just doom stack and just spam mammoths. But whenever I play Norsca, mammoths do definitely make it a lot easier. You can do it without it, but it's going to be a bit of a slog for you. Anyway, that's the end of this one here. Let me know in the comments below what you think, whether you agree or disagree on any particular choice. I'm more than happy to hear other opinions about this, but I want to point out that I did play a campaign where I didn't recruit any mammoths, and I used the entire roster, right? So I'm fairly familiar about what worked and what didn't work, especially about you, Female Warriors, you piece of shit. My god, did they let me down so many times. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next time, fuckers. Bye.